Hi, this is Randy Randall of No Age and host of the podcast Hyphenate with Randy Randall. I want to welcome our newest sponsor of the show, DistroKid. DistroKid helps musicians get their music on all the major streaming platforms, and artists keep 100% of their royalties. Hyphenate listeners get 30% off at distrokid.com/VIP/hyphenate. Again, that's distrokid.com/VIP/HYPHENATE. Go get your music streaming everywhere now.
We would like to celebrate our friends and supporters over at isotope.com, fine makers of audio software for repair, mixing, and mastering. You know their goods: RX10, Neutron 4, Ozone 11, Nectar 4. Chris and I love them, we use them, and we know you'll love them too. And right now they're having a New Year's sale on many of their software bundles. Go to isotope.com and check it all out. And use code RUIN10 when you check out to get your discount. Again, it's izotope.com. And enjoy.
Yo, what is happening? I'm going to stop choking myself. Thank you so much for tuning in to Hyphenate with Randy Randall. That is me. On today's show, my guest is Zach Blair, the guitarist extraordinary from... Oh, no, I could have rhymed that. Why did I miss my rhyme? Zach Blair, the guitarist extraordinaire from the band Rise Against. Zach is a shred monster. He also has an incredible podcast where he talks to other shred monsters called Antihero. And that is on... the same podcast network you're listening to right now, Ruinous Media. So if you like what you hear on today's show, go over to the Antihero page on ruinousmedia.com and check out all of Zach's incredible interviews that he does with so many great guitarists and get really guitar geeky there. Here today, Zach and I kind of get into more of his hyphenated life, his hyphenated career. He's been in many bands. And I think when I think about hyphenates, I think it can go a few ways, not even one or two, but multiple ways, because that's what kind of hyphenate people we are. We go many different ways. But one idea of a hyphenate is somebody who does multiple things at the same time. You could be a professor of politics and also be the lead singer of a band simultaneously, right? Or over time, I think about people whose careers have changed and evolved and matured in some ways. Over time, different things happen. And I think Zach falls into that category of somebody who's really done a lot of cool music over a lot of different years. And I think the styles have changed. His first band, Hagfish, was kind of in a, sort of punk milieu of sorts, but also, kind of poppy and melodic in a way that his next band, Gwar, was definitely a heavy metal, horror, theatrical extravaganza. And then from there to go on to Rise Against, which is, kind of a whole other genre unto itself. And, I think it was really interesting sitting down with Zach and talking about all those different times and sort of what the motivator is. I think that's one thing I've really been getting interested in as these podcasts go on is, what causes people to be multi-hyphenates? What are we trying to do? What is this weird little brain that we have telling us to do all the time? And why do you do so many things, so many different things? Are we bored? Are we ADHD spectrum, people? I don't know. There's a lot to it. I think probably more than I'm qualified to diagnose or even talk about, but I'm curious. So join me while I chop it up with Mr. Zach Blair, talk all things Hagfish, Gwar, and Rise Against, as well as just being an all-around badass guitar player. When doing some research for this interview, I found that he had a very interesting name while he was in Gwar. Gwar, if you're not familiar with the band, was a heavy prop and theatrical metal band where they would wear these elaborate costumes and have blood and decapitations, and it sort of took whatever Kiss was doing in the 70s and turned it up, by about 1 million degrees into something more akin to like kabuki, horror shows. kind of Alice Cooper times 100 craziness. So great. And Zach talks about some great documentaries that are out about gore that he is also part of as well. So I will see you on the other side of the interview. But thank you so much, Zach, for sitting down and talking to me. Let's jump in. Hello, Mr. Zach Blair. Thank you so much for joining me here.
Well, thank you for letting me join, because you joined me. I guess by this point, your episode of the Anti-Heroes podcast will be up, where we got to talk about your wonderful guitar playing. So I am happy to return the favor.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the flip side of the coin.
For sure.
And so you're known as Zach Blair, but you're also known as Flatus Maximus.
Yeah, I am.
How often does that get brought up?
It does. It's kind of like a deep cut, but I'm very proud of it, and a really amazing documentary came out last year called This Is Guar, and you can get it on iTunes and actually the Shudder Plus and AMC Plus app. And it tells the story. I was a part of the documentary too, but I had this tenure with them for 3-4 years, and then had to leave. Just there was issues going on that ended up taking the singer's life, which is all in the documentary. And but before that happened, I got to go back and record with those guys a record called Battle Maximus, and it was sort of a send off to the guy that had replaced me because he had died. Oh my God. Yeah, it's just brutal. And gnarly. That record, it's funny you ask, because that record just got remixed and remastered. It's like the 10-year anniversary of me going back to the band. And this was in the middle of touring with Rise Against and everything. And anyway, that's about to come out. But yeah, I mean, I've always been like in between a punk and a metal guy. I've always they've both been the same thing to me. So it was awesome to be a part of, a thrash metal band that had some notoriety to it,
Incredible. Super cool. So yeah, in the sense of a hyphenate, I would say you're definitely a hyphenate in that, the many bands and many projects and many styles you've crossed over. I mean, you're primarily known as a guitar player, specifically of the notoriety of the guitar player of Rise Against, and now as the host of Anti-Hero here on Ruinous Media, as you have new podcast Feather in Your Cap. Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of switch over there, but I was thinking it'd be fun to kind of go back to the beginning, take it from the start, and we'll just kind of go from growing up in Texas and sort of, where you first learned about music, and then, like I say, kind of where the styles were introduced and where things got started. I did some some quick poking around the interwebs, so just to familiarize myself with a little bit of it. But I want to hear from you. Tell me, where did this all start? Where does the Zach Blair story start?
My dad was a radio DJ, like a classic rock radio DJ. So he would go to work at like 10 p.m. and it was like all night. He would get off work at like 6 or something like that. And and it was his, you could request the new Steely Dan, or you could whatever, this is like from the 70s. It was it's all he ever did. So my dad
is this like WKRP in Cincinnati?
It was exactly
like Johnny Thunder, or no? Was the
Johnny Fever? Yeah. Johnny Fever.
And
my dad loved that show. That was exactly, and even sort of specific to that character, because my father was blind in one eye, so he always wore sunglasses.
Oh wow!
And he was like a 70s rock guy. He had long hair. He wore sunglasses. He was kind of a biker. He was into heavier music too. Like he was into Sabbath and like what would be proto metal, like Blue Cheer and Hendrix and stuff like that, and Led Zeppelin, ZZ Top because of Texas. But so he got my brother and I. My brother's a professional musician as well. He's in the band The Toadies. He's a bass player, and so it was kind of born out of like trying to impress our dad, But it was also just the prevalent thing in our house was like guitar music, and that wasn't just all music. It was specifically guitar music. And he kind of would drill us on bands and knowledge and stuff, like who played bass with Jimi Hendrix, in this band on this record, when I was like 6 and I knew that was Noel Redding or whatever. And then it was just an obsession. It was just all, and we were weirdo kids because our dad was a weirdo freak. and living in a small Texas town, a conservative, Republican, shitty small Texas town that was mostly Southern Baptist and Christian and white. And, that was not a good mix. So we got fucked with and got our asses kicked. And it became this sort of like, this is what we were, this sort of badge of honor. And we found like the other weirdos and just started a band, started playing. And we started kind of a hardcore band that morphed into like a thrash metal band called Harm's Way with a Z. And
Nice.
and just practiced all day, every day, but for us being in this weird Texas town, we got whatever we could that was counterculture and that we knew everyone was going to hate and we were going to piss everybody off. So I remember getting Black Flag My War the same day I got Slayer Rain and Blood. And it was all the same shit to me. You know what I mean? We didn't have the benefit of being from a coast and aligning ourselves to like New York hardcore or the skate punk scene in Southern California or whatever it might be. We just had to get what we could get,
Whatever came through.
Yeah.
Or it's reminding me of that Dead Milkman song. This is a tiny town.
Dude,
I do
know.
This is a tiny town. Mm-hmm. We don't want you coming around.
That's exactly what it was.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then what was your dad's reaction to you guys picking up instruments? I mean, was he thrilled? Did he support it? Did he go out and buy you guys stuff?
So happy. I mean, we were broke because, like I said, he was a radio DJ. My mother was a florist at a grocery store. So we lived in an apartment complex. So it literally broke the bank for him to buy us even shitty guitars and basses. But he became like a football dad. It would be like, did you practice today? What'd you learn today? And I'd be like, I learned this, Four Horsemen by Metallica. It was show me. And I play it for him. Cool. He was that dad. He was super proud of us. He's all, he was so happy. He didn't force us on it, but once we kind of came to it on our own, he was so stoked, so happy.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So I imagine, that the chops get developed quickly. I mean, were you taking lessons as a guitar player?
I didn't. I was also a hyperactive ADHD kid, so I found that I did take lessons, and it was one of those classic things where the teacher just wanted to show me what he wanted to show me, and I just wanted to learn like, Metallica riffs or whatever. And so I found teaching myself was better. And because there was nothing else to do and girls didn't like us and all that shit, we got good quick. And then with the discovery of like Headbangers Ball and 120 minutes, you had Headbangers Ball on Saturday and then 120 minutes on Sunday. So, it's like you had all the thrash and metal, then you had all the punk and post-punk and new wave. And it was just amazing. I was just so obsessed. My brother and I had VHSs of just filled, we'd have them ready and a video would come on. We'd press record and tape that video, It was great.
That's amazing. That is so cool. So then, and this is before really the Guitar Player magazine sort of stuff where you're learning tab in the back of it. I mean, are you literally putting the records on?
They weren't really
playing along by ear.
They weren't really doing tab back then, and that's something Tim from Rise Against and I have talked about often. It's like I would have killed to have had that avenue back then, and beyond that, YouTube. I mean, Jesus Christ. So it was basically just learning by ear and setting the record back and like what the fuck and slowing it down to the speed and stuff and doing whatever you could. I mean, I remember even like putting like nickels and shit on the needle to slow it down, to whatever you could do. So you really had to rely on your ear, which helped later on with doing like guitar for hire gigs and like, hey, you need to learn this entire set. When I got the Guar gig, it was like, you got to learn 45 songs, man. They had already had a bunch of records out by the time I joined. And so it really helped for my future thing,
Yeah, that's huge. I was a tab guy.
Yeah.
I was born in 81. So I think I got guitar at about 12. So it was like 93.
Yeah.
So by that point, there was already, I could go out and go to the grocery store and buy something and just figure out whatever the tab was.
Yeah.
For it and just kind of learn, just go, but it's a crutch I think still to this day. I could hear something, well, let me look up the tab real quick.
Yeah.
I don't have it like as much as I as long as I've been playing, I just don't trust my ear, because I just didn't have developed that muscle of it. So that's incredible. So then what's the first band like? Is there a high school band?
My first band was literally my brother and I and our best friend. He sang, kind of barked, and we were obsessed with like SOD, which was the Anthrax side project. It was just super offensive, like good God, they couldn't have put that record out today. I won't even say what the name of the record was. But, and then that singer, Billy Milano, had a band called MOD. So it was like SOD and MOD. He lives in Austin, Texas, actually, now, Billy Milano. And I often tell him, like, dude, we were obsessed with. But we just did those covers. We just did SOD and MOD covers. And we didn't even have a drummer. And that turned into we knew a guy that had been out to LA. He was older than us and so formidable to our like growth because he had gone to GIT, the Guitar Institute of Technology, you know, and that was so big to us. It was such a big deal. And he drove like a Trans Am and he wore like Z Cavarici pants and he had long hair. He's a good looking dude and he was really great player. He's a guitar player, a bass player, and a drummer. And he was really good at everything and he had money. We didn't have money. His family had money. So he had really good gear as well. And he would just invite us over to his house and he had, you know, full drum set, guitar rigs, bass rigs. It was nuts. So it was like this, like, you know, playground of all the gear, you know, it was crazy. And he was the kind of kid that would like tell his parents to get the fuck out of his room. You know, we were just like, what the fuck? Fuck off, Mom. You know, we're fucking practicing down here. Go get me some fucking iced tea or whatever. And my brother and I were just like, what in the fuck is going on? So, but he was really good. And, you know, from being around somebody that's better than you, you just sort of, especially when you're a kid and I was 13, 14. So it was like you have that brain, that sponge brain. And we really grew very quickly from knowing him. And we had a band called The Government Flew, which is a Dead Kennedy song. Because he was really into punk rock. He had gone out to GIT and was doing like the shredder metal thing. And he had actually taken personal lessons from Paul Gilbert, you know, from, you know, the Paul Gilbert.
Mr. Big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he could do all that shit, you know, sweep arpeggios and just play and all that stuff. But he really wanted to just be in a punk band, which was suited my brother and I fine. And we had our thrash metal band Harm's Way with a Z, and that drummer in that band was also a really good drummer. Like he could play Dave Lombardo stuff, you know, all Slayer stuff. Harm's Way did like Creator, Slayer. We did all those covers, you know, we were pretty good.
Wow.
I mean, I might listen back to it now and go, Jesus Christ, we were butchering it. But
you're ambitious.
We were
You
ambitious.
weren't scared to take on these multi-part, super fast shred fests.
And this kid that could really play drums. So our friend moved back from California to like live with his parents and had all this gear and all that. So we started this punk band and that played in Dallas. We're from about 45 minutes to an hour north of Dallas. It's still called a suburb. It's a town called Sherman, Texas, and it's awful. And we got a gig, like one gig at Dallas's punk club. It was called the Slip Disc and it was a squat. It was just like where punk bands play. We played one gig there and met other musicians in Dallas, other punk musicians. We met this drummer that we started our band Hagfish with. And it went through a bunch of iterations. That guy was our drummer. And we just went through a bunch of like iterations, finding members, losing members and stuff. It was always me and my brother. And it went through a bunch of lineup changes, a lot of sound changes. We kind of started off as more of a hardcore thing, more of a Minor Threat, 7 seconds thing. And then really just kind of it morphed into Descendants. We just wanted to rip off the Descendants, which ended up helping us out because we opened for All, which the Descendants had turned into All at this point, and became friends with those guys. And they liked our band, oddly enough. And so that started what is now a 30-year relationship I've had with Bill Stevenson from playing in a band with him and, you know, everything else. But I was a 16, 17-year-old kid. And he just kind of took us under his wing. Yeah,
what a dream! What a sweet,
right?
Sweetheart.
We landed on a lineup of a drummer named Tony Barsati, who's to this day one of the greatest drummer musicians I know, and our singer George Reagan, and that it got signed to a major label in the '90s. Go ahead.
What band was that?
That was Hagfish.
Hagfish. Okay, got it. Yes.
Bill Stevenson and Stephen Edrich from the Descendants all produced our records, and that was real touring. That was going to Europe, and that was touring with bands in the States, doing full yes tours and all that stuff. And that was really what started me, you know, my whole thing. All the labels wanted a Green Day or an Offspring, and we were ripping off the Descendants and we were wearing suits. It was very 90s.
Yes.
wearing
Yeah,
suits, bald guys, me and my brother, and playing. We were just like Cruise Records. Cruise Records was like all in the Chemical People, a Big Drill Car, all these bands that Bill and Stefan recorded. We just wanted to be that. We didn't know anything about Green Day and Offspring and all that shit. We were Texas, and we were ripping off the Descendants. That was our whole trip. And
But it
eventually,
hit at the right time.
yeah,
It was the right time to be sounding like that.
right.
For that sort of marketplace. Did you do like Warp Tours?
We
Things like
didn't.
that?
I mean,
Feels
that
like
didn't
that's
start
fun.
until like '97 or so. We had Hackish
Okay.
kind of started up around '92, '93. We broke up in about '98, and
Okay.
so
Just on the tail end.
right. But we toured with all of the, No Effects and Face to Face. We toured with all those bands, Lagwagon and everything. Even though we didn't sound like those bands. So they were all peers, and would play, not even tour. We'd play with like Rancid, whoever else would come through, but we never really fit in with anybody. We would go out and tour with like the Super Suckers, or bands that were like more just sub pop, Reverend Horton Heat, stuff like that, or what was happening in LA with the punk scene, or the Boss Tones, or whatever it was. We just couldn't really find a niche. But yeah, that's all I did. That was the '90s for me. It was just this band Hackfish, and that's what really how I learned how to do everything.
That's incredible. But that's really pretty quick from high school onto a major label. Is that characterized correctly? Was it that quick?
It was. I mean, we put one record,
Yeah.
an independent record out on a label in Dallas that kind of put out a lot of Dallas bands, and that was when I was about 17, 18 years old. I quit high school when I was 17. My dad died when I was a senior in high school. Our dad died. He had cancer, and so my brother and I were just like, "Oh, thank you very much." I quit high school. I quit as a senior because I knew I wanted to do this. It's all I ever wanted to do, And when I was 5 years old, my dad showed me. I watched Woodstock on PBS with my father, and I saw the Who. It sounds like some stupid origin story, but that Pete Townsend performance, I was like, that's what he looked like a superhero. He's wearing the white jumpsuit.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's what I want to do. And that's all I ever wanted to do. So we were starting to do it. Hackfish was getting some notoriety while I was still in high school. And I quit. And we started playing almost every weekend. We moved to Dallas, my brother and I. We lived in a garage with like 6 other people. It was disgusting. And
Yeah.
and put out an independent record, and then put out some 7-inches with other cool labels like BYO and, some other cool labels. And then this major label came, and we found a cool manager, and it snowballed. It did happen real quick. Yeah, it happened real quick.
That's incredible. Yeah, but that's the kind of thing too, where like to have that stuff go that fast at that age, and there's determination. There was no like, well, someone's gonna go to college. Well, I'm thinking maybe this. I got a girlfriend, or maybe got that. It sounds. I mean, you would have to everybody just be so in tune, and so all heads pointing in the same direction, which is hard, for a lot of bands at that age. It is the thing, you know what I mean? Like I think everybody wants that sort of line, but isn't really, no one's mature enough or which way knows how to tie their shoes for 5 days in a row in order to string that together. Most bands kind of like, oh, that was the show we're supposed to play, but we didn't. And the thing, and this band got, like that's, you can never get it together.
My brother's always been
incredible.
My brother's always kind of been a sergeant, like a militant, by the book. We got to do it this way, And that's kind of why we went through lineup changes, because we thought somebody else had something else in life but this. We were like, you're not going to work out. This was just all we were going to do, period. And like I said, we lived in a garage. We had like our shit in a bag each, and we just
ready to go.
Yeah, we just did it. We knew that's how you had to do it. And fortunately, Dallas had the Deep Ellum scene at that time, where there was a bunch of clubs, but a lot of Dallas bands got out. Like there wasn't so much Austin bands at the time. There was a big Austin scene. You could be like a bigger band in Austin, Texas. With Dallas bands, they just toured. They just left. So we had all of our peers were like leaving every week to go do tours, and so it was just what you did. And so we started doing that. But I quickly learned that like if Hackfish had stayed together, that was the band that I started with. Literally, my brother, my family.
Yeah.
And it was limiting us musically. We have developed a sound. We knew what we wanted to sound like. And I didn't need to grow as a guitar player, as a musician. I was playing with these guys. I knew what I was doing. I knew what worked for this band, But
lather, rinse, repeat.
Exactly.
Just keep going.
Exactly.
Don't change.
We have this thing we do. We're going to keep doing that. And when it broke up, it kind of it ended sort of abruptly, sort of how it started. I realized I needed to kind of woodshed because I was like, this is all, I quit high school for this. This is all I'm going to do. So I need to go back to the drawing board and I need to learn other styles. I need to get better at this, you know?
And how old were you when it broke up?
Oh God. 22, 23.
Okay.
And
so it's basically like college, you could
yes,
say, you know what I mean? Because that's kind of that 17, 18 to about 22, 23 was sort of when other, you know, people would be going that, you know,
yeah.
What do they call it? Yeah. More learning.
Yeah.
Higher learning.
And it's funny running into guys that we met back then touring that are still in that band from the 90s that they had, you know, with whether it be the Deftones or just other bands that we sort of circled around, that they're still in that band. And it's a trip for me to think like, oh God, what if I was still in Hagfish? If I never had to break out. And it would have been, it's an interesting thing to think about because of course that's my family and that's, you know, my first gear.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad creatively and musically because I did get thrown off the deep end and I did have to sort of sink or swim. And if I wanted a gig somewhere else, I was going to have to learn other styles. And it forced me to learn country and to learn jazz and I went to Berkeley for blues, you know, that was during the pandemic.
Wow.
And I just wanted to be better at the instrument. I wasn't going to master the instrument or whatever, but I wanted to kind of be able to get on stage with whoever and not be lost. And moving to Austin was also a big thing. I had known a guy in Dallas, this blues rockabilly phenom, this guy Nick Curran, which I encourage anybody to check out Nick Curran, but he passed away. All these fucking stories end with people dying around me. It's weird. Maybe it's me.
No.
But he was in the Fabulous Thunderbirds, like the legendary Texas blues rock band that Jimmy Vaughn had been in.
Stevie Ray Vaughan's brother.
But he was a kid. He was younger than me and kind of a punk, like dressed in punk clothes and was kind of a punk band. Him and I started a band that kind of sounded like X. But I kind of brought the punk in and he brought in the blues rockabilly shit. And he was such an elevated player. And that just grew my knowledge of the instrument drastically. You know, it's like I've had these growth spurts of just surrounding myself with people that were better than me. And Bill Stevenson was perpetually that. And those guys, you know, it's just, my God, what are you doing? And how do I earn the right to be in the same room with you quickly? You know, to where you're not looking at me like I'm wasting my time. You know what I mean?
Right. Which is what a great example of a work ethic. I mean, I think it's kind of legendary, Bill Stevenson's sort of work ethic and just the amount of time and hours he puts into playing and practicing.
Oh, dude.
With his Black Flag on.
Well, and he learned it from those guys, from Greg Ginn. But we had a band together after Guar called Only Crime with my brother. And that was, you know, up until then I had recorded records with him and he had been a taskmaster and it was really difficult and nothing was good enough. You know, it was like, no, we're going to do that better. I was like, that's as good as it gets. He was like, nope, I know you can do it better. You know, so we'd literally sit there hours and hours and hours for whatever it was, guitar, vocals, whatever it might have been. And so being an Only Crumb with him, he's now in the band. He's the drummer. So there is a credit, like, you know, like his name's going to be on that record as a member of this band. We practiced 7 hours a day. Like you'd break to eat and you'd go, that was a job, you know, but so important and formidable to, you know, your growth. It's like you
get good.
Go ahead. No, you get good.
Sorry. You just keep, you can't not be good. If you play anything that long or you do anything that long, you get better at it.
Yeah, and you don't rest on the laurels of, oh, it's punk rock, man. We could get by with whatever. It's like, yeah, it is punk rock, but that umbrella covers a lot of, you know, yes, it is beautiful because you can be Johnny Ramone and play a bar chord in a certain way and phrase it a certain way and make it special and perfect. Or you can be Robert Quine from Richard Hell and the Voidoids and, you know, blow people, have this whole other guitar universe where you're this genius. But because it's so avant and outside, it's still punk rock, you know. And Bill sort of fell into that category. And I'm in no way putting myself in the category of him. I've been hanging on for dear life through all of these iterations. But I'm very fortunate and very lucky and thankful, you know.
But I do think it's interesting. You know, I've been doing a few of these now, and I think what's become interesting with me with the hyphenate idea is trying to identify what some of the motivating factors are, what some of the engine is behind people to do so many things. And I look at myself and as an example, but I love seeing that it was the idea that like I think you were saying, like the first idea was to get really good at guitar. There's a familial sort of impress your dad, which I think is 90% of all men.
Sure.
And our motivation of in one way or another, but then past that, with the band breaking up. You know what I mean? Then it's like, okay, shit, I'm 22. I've done nothing else. There was a sort of not desperation, but a sort of like I'm doubling down on this thing, and I'm young enough and still hungry enough to we're not switching. There was no thought of going back to school or getting that kind of thing, right? And so part of that then now it's like, in that interim from Hagfish breaking up, is that when you just exploded? You're learning, like you said, the blues, metal, kind of everything. Like that was it.
I
in hopes of getting another gig,
yes.
or hopes of like,
yes.
What was the thought there? Like, okay, you want to join a band, not necessarily start a band. You're not the songwriter singer person. Is that you've identified that about yourself? Or
well, at that time, no, I became that. I always wrote in Hagfish, but then I was like, I feel like to sort of, because I had to worry about like eating, Hagfish was what I did for a job, and I had so many friends that were professional musicians. I was just like, well, I can offer my services as a guitar player, a performer. I've toured. I have this equity. I put some, I know how to be good on tour. I know how to facilitate that, which is a thing. You as well. You all know. It's not a normal person thing going out there and putting all your shit in a bag and traveling, the world. And so I knew I had something to offer. But I knew I had to work on it. I had to work on those skills. So, Guar wasn't even something I was thinking about. I knew the bass player because he was from Dallas. He lived in Richmond. But in the interim, I just started playing in Dallas bands. There was a band called the Death Ray Davies that were like a kind of an 60s, kind of pop-ish, almost like a Brian Jonestown Massacre, sort of psychedelic kind of a thing. I played with those guys and went and toured with them. I did this kind of more rock and roll kind of a thing with some guys, and I just played in a bunch of different bands. So that's kind of where the hyphenate thing comes in, because I was like, I can't just be a punk rock guy anymore. Like, I'm gonna have to play in a band, in whatever is gonna feed me. I was
you're gonna play to eat.
Yeah,
if you want to eat tonight, I gotta go play. What do you need?
Right.
What kind of guitar you need? What do you got? I'll give it all.
I became that guy. I was doing studio sessions. I was playing in whatever band that needed a guy for that night or that tour. And I ended up getting like punk rock tours, rock and roll tours, that psychedelic tour. I did all kinds of shit, It was, and at the time I didn't have any fucking money, so I was like kind of piecing together, like, I hope this guitar I have works and this amp, it was kind of nuts. But I went out with I did go do tours with punk rock bands. Before Rise Against, I toured with this band, The Loved Ones, that were great, that kind of broke up. And it was just kind of whoever would have me, honestly. It was always better than working some day job. I would do like temp work when I was home, or bar back at a bar, or whatever the fuck it might have been. But it was always there was always some tour coming up with whoever. And then I met, the guys like Nick and the other guys in Austin who they were like, we'd be sitting in there at lunch and they'd get a call for that night. And they would just go do a blues set with musicians they never met, just playing standards, and they'd call it out like, it's in G, and they would, all right, fuck it. And I was like, God damn, that was a whole other level of that shit that I wasn't doing. With what I was doing is like, I needed to know their songs. It wasn't just like, it's an A, go for it. Like, fuck, it blew my mind. When I saw how those guys worked, like in Austin was full of those guys. That was all I was hanging out with when I moved here. Like, I was hanging out with like Gary Clark Jr., who's now a huge, but Gary was a guy, we'd be at coffee and he used to play drums with bands and guitar and bass. He'd go play with anybody. It was fucking great. And so that was like, okay, this is where I want to be. That's kind of what I wanted to do. And then Rise Against happened. That's what I was trying to, it was realistic in Austin. Because a lot, the live music capital of the world, there was enough of a tourism thing to be like, I was studying with those guys and learning how to do it, and that's why Rise Against happened as I was playing with Nick, and we had a band, and it was playing like the local blues place, the Continental and Antones, and it sounded like X. It was kind of like bluesy, and there was a little bit of aggression to it. Rise Against Call Me was the greatest thing that ever happened, but it always still kind of stuck in my craw. I still was like underdeveloped, as in my opinion, as like beginning on stage and just getting, holding my own. So when pandemic happened, I started taking online courses at Berkeley and for a master's in their blues course. It was so dorky, but it was fun.
No, but it's like you got to find your nth degree, complete the circle of whatever it is that's your motivator.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That idea of like, okay, I'm going to come back to this, complete my training.
Yeah.
So I can, know that, because I think that's a big thing too with anybody. I think it's in sports, but it's in art and music. Certainly there's a certain amount of like, how far can I go? You want to test those limits of just what it is. Like, how good could you actually be?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think it's an easy, like you said, there's a lot of like, oh, it's punk, it doesn't really matter. And I think, but there's a lot of that kind of thing of like, if you play baseball or whatever it is, like how far, not only just professionally how far can you go, but even just skill wise. What's your fastest pitch? What's the highest, your personal best?
And
what I mean? I think there's a lot of that, like just pushing yourself to reach that.
And as far as well as I do, like with what you and I do, it's really easy to also forget what makes you when you're taking a bunch of lessons and learning a bunch of other styles. Like I have found myself being so mired in like whatever, I took actual shred courses online. And when I was doing that, or I was taking jazz courses and all this stuff, it was, I personally felt like I was losing what made me, I wasn't phrasing and playing the ways that I sort of had self-taught, and
yeah.
And it's so weird to unlearn, you're like, oh shit, I gotta remember who I am, that's what's great about punk rock is like, you can be blindfolded and go, that's Johnny Ramone, or that's, Stan Lee from the Dickies, or that's Stephen Edgerton from the Descendants. They all have very discernible things that also wasn't as prevalent in metal. When a metal guitar player has that, it's very special because otherwise it could get a little homogenized. Like, there's this overly distorted thing and here's a swept arpeggio and all that stuff. So that was kind of happening in my personal opinion. So I had to kind of step back from, learning and all that shit and kind of relearn who I was and what made me, and so that's been an interesting thing as well.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part about the idea of, sort of the hyphenated sort of life of like, you can be a million places, but is it all you?
Right.
And I think that's also part of it too, is I think a lot of people are more than one thing.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Well, if you were to be honest about it, it's like, okay, you know who you are, but it's like, I'm not just metal guy. I'm not just punk
guy.
Right. Especially as you get older, as you move through time. I mean, I think people go through phases or eras or things. I'm obsessed with the one thing right now.
Right.
But as you grow, time, you mellow or you get the confidence to kind of say, yeah, I like all this stuff.
I like all this.
I like a blues riff. I like this. I like a punk thing. That you can just feel comfortable and confident in embodying and being. Your identity doesn't have to be so defined. I think as a young person, I think it's a blessing and a curse. I think we all do it to ourselves as a young person, is we're so unsure and so unconfident about who we are that we just pick that thing. Like, I'm the Mohawk guy. I'm the guy with the belt. I got the belt. I got the biggest belt on there. I got all the, you know what I mean? I think so much of that of youth culture is about that, sort of self-identifying externally in those kind of ways, and music is a big part of that too.
That's a great point. And I think going back to being from Texas and us not being able to be aligned with any coast or any music, it was all just counterculture to us. I mean, I remember having the REM tape and the Slayer tape, whatever, and so I never liked one type of music, so I never wanted to just know one type of music. And with Hagfish starting and doing so well immediately, it's like I was kind of stunted as a musician. And I was like, wait, I like all this stuff and I want to learn something about all of it and see if I can bring that, somewhere. And so I was trying to be a multi-hyphenate musician, I guess, but then I realized I threw so much at it. It was my hobby. It was my passion. It was my living. And it always has been that. Then I realized, oh shit, I'm like kind of an underdeveloped human because this is all, I started a podcast, but what do? I interview guitar players. It's fucking it.
Yeah, but I think it's, it's all whatever you can handle. You know what I mean? It sounds like obviously you've been hyper successful, super successful with it.
Oh,
I wanted to ask about, in this, was there an era there where there was lots of auditions? And if
Yes.
so, like, was there one riff that would be a make or break thing? Was there something you could pull out? Obviously, you'd have to learn their songs,
Right.
but was there a certain kind of lick or something you could put in that was like code? Like, oh, this guy's great. He can pull off this thing, you know? Because the Beatles always have that thing. There was a thing like, oh, you know, Paul knew Ramble or Rumble, right? He could do the you know, Link Ray Rumble, and like, oh, he's really good. He knows that one. Okay, he needs to be in the band. Did you experience anything like that?
Yes, and you know, for me, I found with like a lot of the punk world, a lot of guys never learned how to play lead guitar properly. And if you knew any sort of cool licks and executed it well, people were impressed. Because, you know, mostly people just worried about being a great rhythm guitar player and facilitating the song. And
the riff.
Right.
Yeah, you gotta write the riff.
And some of my idols were like Scotty Ian from Anthrax, who was notoriously just the rhythm guitar player, or James Hetfield from Metallica, who's still one of the most mind-blowing guitar players of all time, but he doesn't play leads. His right wrist is the drums in that band. It is, you know, it is the metronome.
It's more on time. It's more the metronome than the guy behind the drums.
And he'll admit it. He'll admit it, and they'll admit it. And so I was focused on that, being a you know, as good a rhythm guitar player as I could be and type, but I also was learning how to play lead guitar. And so if you kind of showed up and just as you were warming up did some cool little shit, and not like show offy swept, you know, like I kept saying swept arpeggios, but like, you know, if anybody knows what I'm talking about, those are like this, they're silly, you know what I mean? But it's like very
classical kind of scene.
But if you just did something that was like tasteful and cool with some style and some flair and execute it well, people would be impressed. But I also, if I was like really trying to get a gig like Guar or Rise Against, whatever it might be, I would kind of learn a deep cut that maybe they didn't want me to learn. Or not, or they didn't say to learn. Like with Rise Against, it was like, learn this amount of songs. That way we'll know you can kind of play every song in our repertoire if you know these 5. Because this one's fast and this one's slow and this one's quiet and whatever. If you can play those 5, you can. And that's what Guar did as well. But I would learn like a deep cut that maybe was a little difficult, challenging, and go, hey, why don't we play such and such? And they'd always be like, oh, whoa. You know that?
You give a shit.
Yeah, like know that. Like, hey, you give a shit. You want the gig. You tried it out, and you're serious about this. And not only can you play this 5 they gave you, but you can play this other thing. So it's like, okay, it's a clincher. It's like, oh well, fuck, you could do this whole thing then, you know. Or
that's cool.
Or sometimes go and I would like learn their whole live set because I'm a dork, and you know. It would become this challenge thing to me. Also from my brother. My brother is very militant, very that guy.
Johnny Ramone.
Yeah.
That's what I keep thinking when you talk about him. It's
brother.
Like somebody needed to be the leader.
That is.
Have you read that Johnny Ramone book?
Yes, I have. It's incredible. It's very my brother. Aside from the NRA and like the Republican right wing thing. Yeah, the Reagan.
God bless George Bush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my brother always had that focus and that ethic and ethos toward everything. So I just, you know, I'm not as much as he is. I mean, it's bananas. But you know, I wanted it bad enough, and I knew with Rise Against, I really wanted to be in that band, and I liked those guys a whole lot. And you know, why not push yourself just a little bit extra? There's been gigs, you know, that I've gone out before and haven't gotten, you know, because for whatever reason, maybe who knows, you know, like some other guy might have been better.
What are some of the big ones? What can you share? The big band you went for that you didn't get.
I'll have to tell you.
I know you can't. We'll take it off pod. Okay,
yeah, I'll have to tell you off pod.
I had John Herndon from Tortoise. You know, kind of progressive band from Chicago.
Yeah.
I had heard from John Stainer from Helmet, John Stainer, that drummer, that Herndon had tried out for Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I was like, ooh, this is a story. So when I had John Herndon on the pod, I was like, is this true? And I wasn't sure if he was going to talk about it or not. But he told the whole story about going out, you know, auditioning. And it was him and Chad Smith back to back in whatever late 80s, you know, era that was.
That guy, I don't know that guy. But John Herndon, I remember they used to call him Johnny Machine. and he was in the Poster Children before Tortoise, and we played with that. But I'm sorry to interrupt, by the way.
No.
We
great.
played the Hackfish played a show with Poster Children, and they came back and stayed with us. This is in Dallas in like 93, 92. And I was that was at that time, that guy was the best drummer I'd ever seen. I remember he had a chain. He would like chained his kick drum around his spike, his kick drum, one side around his throne to the other one. And our drummer in Rise Against does that to this day. But I remember seeing that, like, oh my God, he must be so intense. And he was so good. That guy he is so good.
It's incredible.
Yeah,
he still is. Yeah, he's incredible. I feel I'm so lucky to see him play drums whenever I can.
Yeah.
He's incredible. But that kind of blew my mind. Because I think, still coming from that sort of younger mentality of like, oh, well, there's this world and there's that world. These worlds don't cross over. But as you know, probably better than anybody, that there's a huge crossover world.
Absolutely.
Of touring and like playing shows and where you came from and the best friends, this band, it was like.
And if you show that you can
Rage Against the Machine and Tool,
yeah,
you're like, the guitar players are best friends.
And if you show that you can play and that you're good on touring, you can, you're not a dick, you're not a fucking asshole, you're not stuck in your ways about anything. It gets around. It's a small knit circle out there, as you well know. I mean, look at it now. I'm in Rise Against, you're in No Age. We know each other very well. You know what I mean? Like, it just
right.
It's a small knit. Yeah. It's a small knit thing. And then our buddy is Joseph from Cold War Kids, who was also in the Shins and also in Modest Mouse. So it's like. Yeah. One hand, and that's what I love about this fraternity.
Because musicians are musicians. You know what I mean? After 2 minutes of sniffing each other out, you kind of get down to like, oh, what are you playing there? What do you got?
Exactly.
What size picks you have? What is this? What does that do?
Exactly.
Oh yeah, I like that.
We smell our own,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You can tell.
Yeah.
So it's incredible. So now. Hackfit. Oh, Gore. Did we really? Oh, so Gore, you were wearing a full thing. I mean, that's probably the most intense live shows you'd been in. Or how do you compare live shows? I guess in these worlds you've been in, from Hagfish, Gore, Rise Against. What is the most difficult live scenario there? What are your challenges you face?
Gore was just the most sort of. At any given moment, you could get hit in the head with something. You could get drenched with something that would you could get electrocuted. You could get.
And this is all from your band. This isn't from the audience.
For sure. All from the band.
This is the band attacking.
All from the band. And then you couldn't breathe. You had a hot piece of rubber on your face. So, depending on the AC in the club or how crazy the crowd was getting, and it's a big, sweaty, mosh pity, packed venue. You could pass out, which people did all the time. I almost did all the time. I never did, but you'd vomit because you were getting heat stroke. You would get heat stroke. We often did. I would get skin rashes and skin irritations because you can't really properly wash off. It's latex and foam rubber, and it gets dirt. I mean, it gets disgusting. You throw it in a road case every night when you're done. It still gets sweaty. You would get maggots in them in the costumes. You would get, bacterias, and it was disgusting. And so I would get impetigo, or everybody would, because it was like that kind of skin fungus irritation. Oh, it's disgusting, dude. It was fucked. And so that was definitely, not only you really trying to concentrate on this like ambitious music, it's not Ramones, it's not just whatever. And I was the lead guitar player in the band, so I had to do these. The guy I replaced was a fucking amazing guitar player, and so I had to kind of try to faithfully reinterpret his solos, and then plus my own of the records that I had done with him. It was all around. It was 360 degrees of hard. It was all around. Just
everything was hard.
Nothing was easy. Even if you stood still, you were still you couldn't see the guitar because you had a mask. My mask had cheekbones in it. I couldn't see past them. So, you never could phone any of it in.
Like solo in the dark with your hands tied behind your back.
Essentially, yes. Yeah. For an hour and a half, and they long sets, Yeah.
And what was how did you was it hard to keep the guitar working or the equipment working with that amount of just kind of stuff happening, with stuff breaking all the time? Did you have techs? Was there a whole support crew, or were you guys responsible for your own gear?
We had a tech, both. You have a guitar tech that kind of did both guitars and the bass. but you also kind of did a lot yourself. Like in Guar, that band works so hard. If you don't help, load in, load out, kind of help facilitate as much as you can, you're a fucking dick. And you get voted off the island, Wow. Everybody pitches in. There's no like, I'm a musician, I'm the guitar player, so I'm going to hang out on the bus and come in and sound check and then go back out to the bus and come in. No. You're like on call, you're on, hands on. Yeah. And so my guitar tech would work while we were playing, of course, but I mean, I would change my own strings and set up my gear and all that shit. And we would play like free, guitars that were like, if they got fucked up, it wasn't the biggest deal.
Okay.
But they'd stay in tune fine because a lot of them had Floyd Rose tremolos, locking nuts and all that shit. That's getting in the weeds with dorky guitar nerd stuff.
No, I love it.
That's more from my podcast. But
that's right. Anti-hero.
Yeah.
I know. I didn't even ask you what your first guitar was. I've been.
Oh, there you go.
I was like, yeah.
But so it was, if when somebody would get like, we call them decaps, like in Guar, they cut the heads off of things a lot, and so there's somebody in that costume, and they can't really see very well. And so if they would come at you and aim towards you, you would just get covered in like food coloring and water that was supposed to simulate blood. Yep. And so that would go into the guitar, into the pickups, and sometimes it'd fuzz out and you have to change all that shit. Yeah. So it was rough, man. Wow. It's rough.
Yeah, that is a lot. Have you ever been, there was no real blood?
No,
like pig's blood or animal blood?
No, none of that. None of that, but you would be your own blood. Quite often, you get hit with something or whatever. Yeah,
we played a show in Christchurch, New Zealand, and the night before it was some Scandinavian metal band, and they had gone to the butchers and got a bunch of real pig's blood.
Was that?
And the whole club just smelled horrible.
Was it Watane?
I don't know what their name was.
Watane?
I don't know. I didn't see the name, but I was just so pissed because we got in there the next day and they said they tried to clean it, but it just, that smell is just so pungent. And Dean and I are both vegan, and so it's the kind of thing of too. We're like, I haven't smelled. I don't know if this is normal.
Yeah.
This is a normal kind of thing. I think even if you eat meat, you're not used to smelling.
Oh
that much.
No, it's disgusting.
Rotting blood that was overnight with beer and everything else. Just like it, just permeated the whole stage. I just felt like vomiting the whole night.
There's a black metal band called Watane, and they do that. They get like butcher animal parts and animal blood and do that, and it was the same thing. I remember going and seeing them at like TT the Bear in Boston, like downstairs, and it was like really small, and God, it fucking smelled terrible.
The smell's horrible. Yeah. But I imagine the costume smelled.
Oh, they were awful. And like, especially you would sometimes go and open the thing and there's fucking maggots in the costume. Like, yeah.
Oh, that just brings up so many questions.
Oh, dude,
questions
I know.
Like,
I know.
Why? What?
Just disgusting. Disgusting.
Wow. This has been incredible. We have really covered a lot. I do want to talk about Anti-Hero Podcast. Where did this come from? Now, you've played amazing guitar in all these bands, lifelong career. And then what made podcasting attractive, or how did this get born?
Well, I had started a podcast like maybe during pandemic because there's nothing else to do with one of my best friends, a guy named Mike Wiebe, who is an actual multi-hyphenate. Like, he is an actor, musician, stand-up comedian. He sings for a band called the Riverboat Gamblers, but him and I have a band called Draculas, which is also another different type of music that's more like new wavy, synthy, devo, post-punk, and it's one of my favorite things I've ever done, but unfortunately I don't get to really play with it much anymore. He tours it with another band, with other guys, but we still write it. Anyway, so we had started a podcast during pandemic called Zach and Mike Make Three, where we basically just fucked with each other. We just, they were really close friends, and he's a really funny guy, so it made me feel like, oh shit, I can actually do something else, it's not just music. And our mutual benefactor, I guess, but also amazing musician, Joseph Plummer from the Tour Stories podcast. He had me on Tour Stories, and I didn't know Joseph. He asked for me, which is great. I think he had maybe heard the Zach and Mike Make Three podcast, and he, at the end of it, he's like, man, have you ever thought about having a podcast? What would you want to do? Because he has Ruinous Media, which is the platform that we're both on. And I came up with the concept of, well, I would love to talk to guitar players that I think are interesting, and there we go. And now it's Anti-Heroes with me, and it's on the 3rd season now, and I just love it.
It's incredible. Yeah. It was a similar kind of story with me. Yeah,
Yeah.
I did this thing. I think you did it as well for Vans during the pandemic. They
Oh,
had,
and our
streaming shows.
our bass player
started doing
Joe
that.
did one. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, I had a monthly show on that, and where I would interview people and play records and stuff, and I was like, this is really fun.
Yeah.
I'd never really, I've been on the other side of being interviewed so much, but never really on this side of it. And then I was on Joe's podcast, and I was like, this is this could be fun. And so I talked to him more about it that way.
It's so fun, and it gives me it gives me another thing to do that's still music related. For me to be like really invested, I think there has to be some sort of music slant to it, and I just have to accept that in life, that's just who I am. And I don't golf, I don't surf, I don't gamble, I don't I just to me this is enough. There's so much to this, what we do, that it's so multifaceted. It scratches a lot of itches for me. It's just magic, and it's all I'm into. I collect guitars and amps and all that shit, so it scratches that itch. I have something to look for, whatever.
Yeah.
And
there's enough. Yeah, there's tech, there's creative,
Yeah.
there's business, there's all the stuff of it all. There's enough stuff within that world.
Absolutely.
That it definitely can become a 360 sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's incredible. This has been super fun. Thank you so much. Is there anything you want to promote or that you're looking to plug?
Anti-Heroes podcast, and the Ruinous Media Network that you are listening to this podcast on. And we have Randy Randall coming up. I don't know when this episode's going to air. It might have already aired.
It's probably has already been aired.
Yeah.
This might be a while after that.
Rise Against have some festivals coming up in September and one in October. So maybe look at all things Rise Against for that. Our Instagram and website. I'm so bad at promoting. We're going to Australia with Blink 182 in February of next year. So yeah, a bunch of stuff coming up. Check all that out.
Awesome. Well, Zach or Flatus Maximus. I wrote it down over here. I have to check. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming
Randy,
on.
thank you so much for having me, and also thanks for doing my podcast. It's
for sure.
Friends for
Anytime.
Life. Friends for Life.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yes. Is he not just the sweetest man you have ever met? Zach, I am charmed by you constantly. Thank you so much for having me on Anti-Hero. It was a pleasure to geek out. I do not get to geek out enough about guitar. I could always use more geeking out time in my life. I'm sure most guitarists feel that way. If you really ever want to get a guitarist talking, ask them something about tubes. Ask them about pedals or cabling, and you will find yourself in a 20-minute deep dive conversation about whether these EL34s are really mid forward enough, or if you can get down to some 6550s, really chunky low end kind of tube situations. And there'll be lots of numbers and words like frequencies and ohms and I don't know, silly guitar words, players. The tone's all on the fingers, man. That's all you got to say. If you ever find yourself, it's also another trick and tip. Another tip: if you're ever in a conversation with a guitar player, just say "tone's in the fingers, man." And they will agree instantly. And no matter how geeky or how nerdy they're getting into whatever kind of setup they have, digital versus analog versus single coils versus humbuckers, just say tones in the fingers, man. And they will go, yeah, you're right. It'll take them back a step. So thank you again, Zach. And please, everybody, go listen to his podcast, Anti-Heroes, here on Ruinous Media. You can find it at ruinousmedia.com/antihero. And go check out Rise Against. They're going to be touring somewhere, wherever you are. Their deep back catalog is all out there on the streamers and at your local record stores. And do yourself a favor and listen to Hagfish also. I feel like that took me back quite a number of years hearing those songs, and as well as the Great War documentaries that are out there on the Great War records. So thank you again, Zach, and thank you everybody for tuning in. I will see you on the next one. Bye.